Respected resource persons, dear participants from various parts, and my dear fellow colleagues, very good evening to you all. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for the second day of 7-day FTP series. Without further delay, let me introduce today's chief guest of session 1, Dr. Aparna Nahi ma'am. Dr. Aparna Nahi ma'am is presently working as professor in Department of Economics, Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla, with 28 years of teaching experience and research experience and 15 years of administrative experience. She has been actively contributing to conferences, seminars, workshops as organizer, paper presenter, session chairperson, keynote speaker in India and abroad. Her publications include papers, reports, book chapters, case studies, compilations, and edited publications. She has supervised 9 PhDs, 65 MPhil, 5 MA dissertation of foreign nationals, and completed 45 MA/BE project reports. Recently, she is the founding member of Economic Association of Himachal and life member of Indian Society of Labour Economics, Indian Economic Association, Indian Council of Child Welfare, Sexual Harassment Committee of IIAS, and Board of Studies of HP University. She has also been overseas visitor to the University of Nepal, Netherlands, People Republic of China, USA, UK, and Germany. We are very much happy to have such an excellent personality with us today. Now the session is yours, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. My only request is that I find it impossible to speak to a picture. So I will have to ask all of you to please turn your videos on. You can keep your microphone on mute. But the condition is that if there is anything you wish to ask or you wish to intervene or you wish to interject, please feel free to do so. This is not a monologue. I am here to only share with you some experiences that I have gained over the years in reference to research. And that's basically what I want to share with you. I'm going to start sharing screen, and I understand that I have about 1 hour with you, in which I have to also factor in some time for questions and an interaction with all of you. So as I said, we can have questions at the end, but you can also intervene during the lecture. It's not that you have to wait for me to finish, because if you wait for me to finish, sometimes the urgency of the question is lost. So please feel free to intervene. Also, I need to know what language do you want me to speak? Should I speak only in English, or you want me to mix it up with Hindi? These are the 2 languages I can manage.
Ma'am, only in English, ma'am.
Only English, madam.
Only English. That's fine with
Yes,
me. Works fine. My presentation is completely in English. But if there is somebody who requires a little bit of Hindi, I'd be happy to do that for you. But I don't speak any other language with with such competence that I'll be able to, touch on local languages. That will not happen. So, anyways, I'm going to start sharing screen with you. Present
Yes, ma'am.
now. Window. This is what I want to show. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do is, just a second. I'll have to make this bigger. Please bear with me for just 1 minute. You'll probably be seeing this a little small. I'll make it bigger so that you're able to read it. But because I want to be able to use my stylus, There are things I want to be able to write and draw in between. So therefore, I will stick to this format. If you want, I can change it. That is another story, right? So what I want to talk to you today about is quality and quantity concerns for the researcher. Some key aspects there, because when we undertake research, we talk of qualitative research and we also talk of a quantitative dimension of research. So I'm trying to, sort of based on my own experience over the years, I want to just share with you some what I would like to call key aspects that every researcher must be aware of. And also my understanding is that all of you are from the social sciences. Is that correct? Or are you from languages and other faculties as well?
From many
Will
disciplines,
the
ma'am.
organizer, beg your pardon?
From many disciplines, ma'am. Not only language, ma'am, from many
You're,
disciplines.
you're from social sciences and language, and it's a cross section of subjects that are represented in this group. Yes. There are I don't know how many of you I can see. Then there are, but I want to have your because I'm working on a dual screen, so I can see your faces. So therefore, please turn on your video cameras. Pushplata, Hima, Shaila, Dr. Jaya, Dr. Jia, and there are 76 others. So I can see most of you, but it's very difficult to talk to a picture. I have to see a face. So this 1 hour, you shall be troubled. Okay, so the point is that this is what I want to talk to you about, and who I am, you already know. I need to go to the next slide. Okay, so the format that I have chosen to speak to you with, this format is fundamentally three things I'm looking at: the what and the why of research, a basic toolkit that every researcher must have, and some focus on interpretation. Because when we undertake research, we find stuff, we draw conclusions, we find in we get results. So what is the interpretation of that result? How do you interpret that result? A little bit about that, because the whole idea is that we are in some sense searching for the truth or trying to get at the truth. And we are doing so with through our own eyes, through our own experience. So quite naturally there is a personal dimension. I mean, in research we are told that we must always be objective, that we must never let a personal a personal element enter into our interpretation. But no matter how hard we try to be objective, some amount of objectivity is always compromised. So that's why this truth that I'm showing you is a little scattered. It's not a very clearly written truth. You can see that some parts of this are sort of missing. Anyways, now the point that I want to make is I'm talking to you about quantitative research and I'm talking to you about qualitative research, two dimensions. Yes. Now, if I say, what is quantitative research? Quite naturally, quantity refers to numbers, right? It refers to measurement. It refers to measurability. So whoever is the researcher that is wanting to deal with quantitative information is essentially trying to explain phenomena or trying to arrive at an explanation of data based on numerical data, based on numerical data, which are then analyzed by means of mathematically or even statistically based methods. So the simplest what that we do, quite natural. I don't know if all of you are in the teaching profession or not, but I really don't know. I would imagine that all of you are connected to teaching. You're researchers, but you're also connected to teaching. So very often, you're asked, what is your impression about this class that has been assigned to you, about the students in your class? So seems to be a bright class. I've looked at their marks, and they on an average, they seem to have a good record up until now. Now, when we talk like that, we are using statistics. Two things we're doing. If I have just glanced at the marks card of the entire class, I have a class of 50 students, and I have just looked at the marks, and I see that the majority of students have in excess of 70% marks. That's the feel I get when I look at the marks card of the entire class. And based on that, I say, oh, this is a brighter than average class, because the largest number seems to be of students who have more than 70% marks. Then that is mode. That is 70 and above seems to be the most, the number that is recurring the most or appearing the most in this information. So that is the mode. On the contrary, if I was to take all the marks, add them all up, and because I have a class of 50, I divide the marks by 50, I arrive at a value which is the arithmetic mean. Now, the difference between the two is that in the second instance, where we totaled all the marks, divided that by the total number of students, we actually made a calculation. And that is the arithmetic mean. So very often we express the arithmetic mean, but actually what we are doing is we're talking about the mode, because we are talking about invariably about the number that seems to appear the largest number of times. So whenever you're doing that, essentially in research terminology, it's called a head count. When you're just counting the largest, which is the number that occurs the maximum number of times. Or in this group of 83 participants, how many people wear glasses? If I was to just do a head count, that's mode. That is not arithmetic mean. So we invariably report the mode, thinking or assuming that we're talking about the arithmetic mean. These are two completely different things. So when we are in the business of quantifying information or dealing with numerical data and trying to use statistical or mathematical methods, we have to be really careful about which method we are using, because every formula will give you some answer. When you put numbers into a formula, it will generate some output. As a researcher, it is for us to make sense of that. And therefore, as a researcher, it is very important for us to know which is the most appropriate tool to use. So when I say that that quantitative research is about a researcher using, explaining phenomena based on numerical data, which is being analyzed using mathematical, especially statistical tools, then the most operative thing here is the knowledge of statistical and mathematical tools. Because there's so many tools that are floating around. If my basic subject is economics, I have studied some amount of mathematics and some amount of statistics, but that does not make me a mathematician or a statistician by any stretch of the imagination. As a student of economics, I have studied only that statistics and only that mathematics which is relevant to me as a researcher or relevant to me as a student of economics. Similarly, there are some tools that are relevant to all of us. It doesn't matter whether we're from economics or from the languages or from any other faculty. There are some fundamental tools, and I'll come to that in a subsequent slide. There are some tools that we must know. Otherwise, that basic toolkit that as a researcher, each one of us must have, there are some tools that are absolutely sort of almost mandatory for us to possess. So I'll come to that in a bit, but I'll just carry on with this description of what I like to call quantitative research. And what it does is, what it is also, that it is a broader perspective. It's a type of empirical research into social phenomena or human problems, testing a theory consisting of variables which are measured with numbers and analyzed with statistics in order to determine if the theory or explains or predicts the phenomena of interest. So it's basically rooted in numbers. It is you put data into a formula, you get some answer. The whole idea with quantitative investigation is that if you do it correctly, and if you have followed all the steps the way they were meant to be followed, then anyone who replicates your experiment will find the same answers. That is the beauty of good quantitative research. It must have replicability, it must be valid, it must be reliable. So all of these attributes will come in because you are quantifying, you're trying to minimize the subjective element within this. And as opposed to this, if I was to very briefly try and talk to you about what is qualitative research. Now, the fundamental thing with qualitative research is that it is deemed difficult to define because of its multifaceted nature underpinned by different paradigms. Qualitative means descriptive. And since nobody objected, so I assume all of you are connected with teaching or our teachers in your respective institutes, one thing that we do at all times is we are evaluating our students. Now, if you give a kid 6 out of 10, or you give a kid 8 out of 10 in your class, 8 out of 10 is 80% in any language. 6 out of 10 is 60% in any language. There can be no ambiguity. Whereas if you were to rank someone and say, oh, this is an excellent performance. Another kid, you say, this is a very good performance. Another child, you say, this is a good performance. To another kid, you write fair, could have been better. To somebody, you write poor. Now, the point is, these are value judgments that that we are making as teachers, but they can be interpreted in several manners. And it is not necessary that everyone comes to the same understanding or has the same interpretation of the qualitative word that has been used. You know, if you're a teacher who's very liberal with their marking, you will very easily, you will grant a very good and an excellent very easily. Whereas if you're a teacher who's of a slightly stricter disposition and wants to run their, really give a grinding to their students and trying to make sure that you push your students really hard so that those students perform even better in each subsequent test, and if that is what drives you, then you might say, if some kid has scored a 7 out of 10, you might say, very good performance. Now, very good to a 7 out of 10, and somebody who's got a 9 out of 10 is also getting a very good, those two students will get confused. How is 7 out of 10 very good and how is 9 out of 10 very good also? So that's the trouble with qualitative interpretation and qualitative descriptions, because there are many underpinnings. There are many ways of interpretation. There's a lot of subjective element. So that's what creates a problem. But perhaps a working definition could be that it is any type of research that produces findings not arrived at by statistical procedures or other means of quantification. Having said that, I will also introduce you to something that we call the chi-square test, which is a statistical tool available to us to interpret, to analyze qualitative information. So that's a statistical tool for you, which helps you deal with qualitative information also. But having said this, this is very briefly what I wanted to convey to you with regard to qualitative as well as quantitative research. So therefore, if I was to try and sum up these two slides, what I would say is that, when you undertake research, ideally and mostly, and I think also in ideal situations, we don't confine ourselves to purely quantitative and purely qualitative research, at least in social sciences. If you're in a laboratory, in a chemistry laboratory, mixing chemicals, or you're doing some experiment in physics, or you're doing something in a laboratory in biology or zoology or some such science, it is possible that you're doing pure quantitative stuff and there's no space for qualitative research at all. But after all, in a test, how many milligrams of something and how many milliliters of something else, and kaboom, you have some experiment is taking place. Now that's pure sciences, I would imagine, but I think even there, because we are also now in a phase in research where we are looking at doing a lot of interdisciplinary work. And that's, I should have said this at the beginning, and that really is something that I'm very fond of. It's something that I like to promote, where we cut across disciplines, where we, where as a student of economics, I have the liberty of even interacting with somebody from psychology or somebody from neuroscience or somebody from chemistry. For instance, one of my students is now working on the economic dimension of indigenous knowledge. Now, for that, I'm going to have to rely on my colleagues from the chemistry department as well, because we're going to need to do some testing there. And also, normally economics and history would have nothing to do with each other. But the oldest form of knowledge, what is the written record of that? I need to even consult with colleagues from the history department. So there's a lot of space for interdisciplinary work, and therefore a lot of space for qualitative and quantitative research to come together. And that's, I think, a very interesting possibility that we have in research. And in fact, interdisciplinary work is also being encouraged by UGC and other such forum. So the point is that when you look at qualitative or quantitative work, the meaning that people attach to their experience of the world, that is important. Now you do it through quantitative means, and then then you bring a qualitative description. That really is your choice. And qualitative research is not based on a single methodology. I mean, the fact that it's difficult to describe, difficult to define, is also compounded by the fact that it is not based on any single methodology and does not belong to any single discipline. It draws on the philosophical ideas of several other things, and the attention to quality is being greatly emphasized. It's not so much what happened. It is not so much how much happened. It is now also why did it happen. And why did only A happen? Why not B? Had B happened, what would be the consequences, and so forth. So there's a lot of delving, there's a lot of digging deeper into whatever we are finding. And therefore, qualitative research is now being used as an overarching category covering a wide range of approaches and methods found within different research disciplines. And as I was just saying, that we draw also on literature, for instance. We draw on, I work in gender studies. I work in, women's studies. I don't like to call it women's studies, gender studies, empowerment, the dimension of empowerment of, communities, livelihood options, and so forth. And that is where we rely greatly on people, our friends from literature, to give us a lot of input, because the stories that get written, the novels that get written, the dramas that get written, the poetry that gets written, tells the story of the times in which it was written. So we know when we're trying to do what I like to call, or what I'd like to think of as hardcore work in economics, we are also relying very heavily on our colleagues from literature to give us all the input. So it's not just that we are relying only on economics. And I'll come back to more of this. Just a second, what has happened here? Why does this not move? Just a second, there's some issue with my computer here. What has happened to this? Why does it not go to the next slide? Just a second, I don't know what has happened here. Home. It should go to the next slide. Yeah. Now, since this presentation I will be submitting for all of you, I found a table. I have not bothered to break it down and make several slides out of this. I could have done that, but because I'll be giving this presentation to you, you should be able to see it. This is a table I found from the source is this. I have adapted it from Gleason and Peshkin of 1992 and Lincoln and Guba 1985. And I came up with this table. It's a comparison of quantitative and qualitative models. Now, for example, if you look at just assumptions of quantitative methods are that reality is single, it is tangible, it is fragmentable, social facts have an objective reality. For qualitative research, the assumption is that realities are multiple, they are constructed, they are holistic, and that reality is socially constructed. And like that, you can find a number of differences in assumptions, in the purpose of quantitative and qualitative research, also in the approaches that are taken while conducting both, and also what is the researcher's role. Now, I'm sure there are several, you would have read a number of books and a number of texts where the differences and the similarities between qualitative and quantitative research are very adequately described. What I liked very much in this table was the researcher's role. Now, what have I done with it? Where did the researcher's role go? Yeah. Now, if you look at the quantitative side, it talks about the researcher's role as being detached and impartial, as being the researcher presenting an objective portrayal, and considering the outsider's point of view. That's the ethical dimension. And for qualitative research, personal involvement and partiality, empathetic understanding, and the insider's point of view are extremely important. So this is what I want to dwell on for just a minute. Because as a researcher, when let's say you've done your MPhils and your PhDs and you're writing research papers and you're getting your students to do all of this work. So therefore you will completely, so you'll appreciate what I'm saying, that the researcher is one person. And for the researcher to be completely compartmentalized into, this is my quantitative dimension and this is my qualitative dimension, is humanly impossible. It is just not possible. We're the same person. Without us, it's not possible for us to straitjacket ourselves into watertight compartments. So when we are as researchers, it is possible that we are wanting to be detached and impartial, but then we are also personally involved. Now, the point is that when we've understood, or when we've studied research methodology, we've read the book by Goodey and Hart, and we've read so many others. I don't know what books you've consulted, but these are some of this. This is Goodey and Hart is one of the most standard books on research methodology. They talk about subjectivity and objectivity. Now that comes into clash with this qualitative and quantitative dimension to some measure, not completely, but to some measure for sure. But the point is that as a researcher, one has to be extremely careful, because if we put too much of a personal spin on on interpretation, then we can run into a lot of difficulty. I'll give you a small example. Have any of you been to the Himachal hills? Have you been to? I live in Simla, the state capital, and I don't know how many of you have been to Shimla as a city, and how many of you know a little bit about Shimla, the district. It's one of those places. Just share this. The name of the city is also Shimla. The name of the district is also Shimla. Now the point is, what I wanted to share with you is that if you drive away from Shimla, from the city, about 50 kilometers into the higher mountains towards, you would probably have heard of Naldera as a golf course. You would have heard of Narkanda Maha Hills for the ski resort. Now, if you drive towards these places, you will be surrounded by the countryside, by villages. And if you actually wander into the villages, you might find an elderly woman who's smoking a beedi, a cigarette, or that to the leaf that's rolled up. It's possible. And I know for a fact that people observe this behavior and nobody bats an eyelid. And you just sort of take it in your stride that this is okay, this is happiness to them, whatever. We don't even think twice about it. But if you were to be in Simla as a city, and you were to find a woman pull out a cigarette and start smoking, immediately we start judging that person. Now, this woman in the city is as much a woman as the woman in the hills, in the villages. Why do we judge them differently? We have to be cognizant of all this, because when we write our research reports, we carry this baggage. Unconsciously, without really being conscious of it, we are creating a difficulty for ourselves as a researcher. So please, that's what I want to say, that when you're looking at personal involvement, when you're looking at at interpreting the reality that you're observing, then you have to be very mindful of why you are interpreting something as you are doing so. What is the baggage that you carry? What is it that guides your interpretation? That is something we have to be very, very mindful of, and it's a very basic necessity of a good researcher's toolkit, that you keep subjectivity in interpretation out of it. But of course, there will be personal involvement and partiality to the extent that you're involved with qualitative, research. So these are things. There's slight dichotomy here, but then you have to be very, very mindful of it. Now, so the bottom line is that there are 4 essential elements of the research process which must be addressed. Whether you're doing qualitative work, or you're doing quantitative work, or you're doing a combination of both, there are 4 elements that you need to consider. And what are those 4 elements? And I found an article by Denzin and Lincoln who made this suggestion, and I found it very, very useful. So I wanted to share this with you. Which paradigm or worldview will inform your study design? What is your perspective? How well have you done background reading? How much are you aware of let's say the backdrop against which this the phenomena is playing out that you wish to study. Who or what will be studied? Which research strategies will be used? And which research methods or tools will be used to collect and analyze the data? You can even call it, if you don't want to call it data, you can also call it information. You might be generating qualitative information. So what are the tools, what are the research methods or the tools that are going to be used to collect the information and also then to analyze the information? And when I'm talking about collecting, I have to say, I have to sound a word of caution. We invariably, like, because I live in Himachal, I am from Himachal, I'm comfortable here, I know the local language, traveling for me here is not a problem. In most places I have people, so logistics, board and lodging will not be a difficulty. So therefore, when I'm undertaking research, I try and say, oh, my study area will be Himachal. Now, if that is the reason for selecting Himachal as a study area for myself, then that is not a good method at all. That's convenience. Now, convenience sampling or convenience as a method for doing research may have some value. But essentially, if I leave the rest of India out and I study Himachal only because I am from Himachal, there's no value in that. I will not be able to justify it. There has to be some reason which stands the test of time, something that I can justify statistically to say that, okay, this is the reason why I have chosen Himachal. For example, in a study on hydropower, if we look at where all hydropower is being generated in the mountain regions, then if through the sampling process I arrive at Himachal as my state of interest or my study area, that possibly can be justified. But there will be so many other studies where it will not be justified just by saying that because I live here and therefore I must do it. That's convenience, and convenience cannot be the basis of good research. So can I just quickly go to the next slide? Yeah. So this basic toolkit that I'm talking of, and I was reporting to you on what is the background and how well equipped or how soundly aware are you of the background of the research that you wish to undertake. What is a very critical element there is a review of literature, and reviewing literature it's a task in itself. Not only do you have to identify what is relevant, because somebody else's research may not be directly suitable for what work you're wanting to do or what work I'm wanting to do, but there may be some dimension there that is of relevance, so I should be able to pick that up. Now, for that to happen, of course, I must know my subject. I must have some understanding of the concepts that are involved and of the variables that I've identified and so forth. But I think what is most important, and something that we sort of take a little lightly, I think rather unfortunately, is competence of language. It is mandatory. There is no escape from this. We have to have language competence. The best books that are written for all of our subjects, none of them are in local languages. So while it is true that, when we are teaching in class, we must be able to communicate, we must be able to convey exactly what it is that we are wanting to convey to our students. And there we may need to use the local language. I can understand that perfectly. There's no point going into a class and rattling something off and your students are zapped and they have no clue what you've just said. That's not how it should be. But as a researcher, competence of language, as researchers, for that matter, even as teachers, we can't hide behind language incompetence. And none of us are born speaking any language at all. We learn as we grow. So there is absolutely no question in my mind that if language for us is a little bit of a handicap, it's a handicap that we're aware of. And when I'm aware of my handicap, why should I not improve upon it? It'll take a little time for sure. But the sooner we start, the sooner we'll get to the end of that process of learning the language, of knowing the language. And there is no shortcut to learning language except to speak it. We can read it, we can reproduce it, that's fine. But when we are studying to write an exam, there's 5 questions to attempt and therefore so much to reproduce. So whatever you have read in a textbook, you will reproduce that, and there the matter ends. But as a researcher, the responsibility is a little bit bigger. Not only are you observing reality, not only are you making observations, you are analyzing those and then reporting that by way of interpretation. Now, if we don't have language, what is the point of having a brilliant idea in my head if I don't know how to express myself? So hiding behind, a language incompetence is completely unforgivable. And I think it's one of the biggest wrongs that we can do to ourselves as researchers. There's so much I want to convey. There's so much I've found through my research, but I just don't seem to have the words to express myself. How far is that going to get me? And how am I conscious, or what makes me conscious of the fact that I need to improve my language? The fact that I have written a paper, shot it off for publication, and it has come back. No publication house is ever going to tell you what is exactly wrong with your paper. They will only at best very politely say that the theme that you have touched upon, or the research that you are reporting is not in line with the theme of our journal, or not in line with the theme of our publication. So perhaps at another time, or perhaps you need to shoot this paper off to some other publication. They will never tell you exactly what is wrong, because a paper which is well written, it may not have 20,000 brilliant things inside. It may just have 1 or 2 good points that you have found, good research outcomes that you are reporting. Maybe not even 2, just 1, but very well written, or written in words that are steeped in the subject of which you are a student, and reported correctly. That paper will always find favor, will always get published. So you cannot hide behind language incompetence. As a researcher, it's a complete no-no. In this, you need to, all of us, myself included, we need to invest a little bit of our time and a little bit of our effort, because it is one thing to know language, but it's not that we are wanting to learn language to make polite conversation. We are wanting to learn language to communicate research findings. Now, those research findings are of our subject. There's some topic we have picked up in our own subject, and we're wanting to report that. So when you write, not only must you write good language, but whatever you're writing must reflect your knowledge of your subject. That is how important. It is a basic element in any researcher's toolkit. And I will again refer you to the work that I do on gender studies, for instance, or the work that we do on issues of environment, for instance. Anyone with half a brain, I'm absolutely convinced, can talk very intelligently about issues of gender and issues of environment. But there has to be a difference between an academic writing or an academic speaking on a given topic, or just drawing room conversation. And how is that difference ever going to come about? How are you ever going to be taken as a serious researcher? It's when you put your thoughts and your ideas in good language. I cannot express this enough. I cannot stress this, how important good language is as a basic element in a researcher's toolkit. That is one. And staying with language, the other thing I want to emphasize is that we must also be very open-minded and liberal. By open-minded and liberal, I mean, as researchers, we are very likely to come across various interpretations, various points of view. So what is the best thing to do? You're expressing yourself, and you're wanting to express yourself. Please allow that same space to another researcher who wants to express a different idea. So we can agree to disagree. We can always say, okay, this is your point of view, but I feel differently and my research says this. So we don't have to kill each other about something or get very upset and offended about something. We have to be very liberal and very open-minded. Because what research, I just gave you an example of, if all 102, there are 102 participants I see now, if all 102 of us were to wander into the hills and find an old woman smoking, And then if I was to pull out a cigarette from my bag, and you could look at me and say, short hair, things she look at her. It was expected that she'll have a cigarette in her bag. Why do you judge us differently? So the point is, being open-minded and being liberal and allowing space to others is very important, because when we are reporting research findings, we require that open-mindedness from others as well. So if I request open-mindedness from you, I must extend it to you also. And that is how disciplines grow. That is how new ideas are generated. If we straitjacket ourselves and say, okay, only this and no left, no right, then how is the subject ever going to evolve? Staying with economics, which is my subject, we're all living in COVID times. If it was not so much for this COVID doing a resurgence and all of this, whatever is happening with COVID around us even today, you probably, all of us would have been in a physical interaction with one another, where would have been one-on-one, rather than this interaction through cyberspace. Now, if you look at COVID and if you look at what all has happened, as a student of economics, I know we talk about rationality of human beings. We talk about the rational man, as in, who is a rational being? A person who maximizes utility, who makes sure that they get the most out of every situation. And we've taught this rationality concept to every possible discipline, or we talk about it to anyone who cares to listen to us. Now, the point is, if you look at how people have behaved post-COVID, post the first and the second wave, you will find a number of people went back to urban centers because there was some better job options, some had some thought of better health facilities, some thought of better educational possibilities for their children, and so forth. There is a sizable chunk of people who've said, nothing doing. We will make do with less, but we will not go back to a city. Now, when you're saying I will make do with less, so in the purely economic sense, this person is completely irrational. So in some sense, this whole concept of rationality has been spun around on its head. But perhaps we need to define rationality differently. What the individual is valuing is mental peace, is peace of mind, is a feeling of, at least I'm with my family. And if that is what a person is wanting to maximize, and is saying that this is where my satisfaction and my fulfillment lies, then certainly such a person will not go back to the city. And I cannot sit around and say that, oh, this person is being irrational. So it's also possible that we will need to redefine our concepts. We will need to rework what we have thought of. And, staying with economics, we've gone into linked to its psychology and come up with what is called behavioral economics. We've gone a step further and linked with people who study neurology, medical professionals who do the nervous system. We deal with them, we interact with them and talk of neuroeconomics now. So look at how subjects evolve. Now, if we were not open-minded and liberal, allowing space for other subjects and allowing for interaction of our own subject with others, how would these developments ever take place? So these are very essential elements that a researcher must be cognizant of. And there is no shame in admitting that I don't know language, or that my language competence needs improvement. The sooner we admit this to ourselves, the sooner we'll emerge from it. The sooner we will be doing acquiring better language. But that conscious effort has to be there. And then another element is sampling. When we're doing quantitative work or qualitative work, I was talking to you about convenience. I'm from Himachal, so that I must study only Himachal. It's a matter of convenience. Doesn't always work. Sampling is a huge is a huge enterprise in itself. There are complete books written on sampling, not just chapters in a book. And those we must go through. Because how do you arrive at what is a representative sample? If you invite me, when we have guests over and we've cooked a pot full of lentil, or we've made a pot full of some dessert, and we want to see that, everything is okay, the sugar's all right, the taste is all right. So how do? We give the whole pot a stir, and then take a small sample in a spoon and taste that and get an idea of what the whole pot contains. Now, we didn't just take a sample, take a spoonful from the side. We first gave it a stir and then picked up. Why? Because every possible element in that pot should have had a chance to come into our spoon, and it did. That's the essence of sampling. Every element, every member of the universe, of the population that we wish to study, must have an equal chance of being selected in that sample. So what is the best way to do that? That is where the knowledge of sampling theory comes in. So whether you're a student of literature or you're a student of whatever subject, the fact is sampling is something that when you're confronted with it, it is something that there are steps to follow, and those steps must be followed. There is no, you can describe your the procedure that you undertake, but the steps have to be followed. There is no getting away from it. And we have to come to, first we have to acknowledge that we do this convenience sampling and try and pass it off as random sampling. But the fact remains that convenience sampling is convenience sampling, and we should, as far as is possible, wherever you can do away with it or do without it, that's where it has to be avoided. And then there are, quantitative tools, which are, there are some tools that all of us must know. It is not necessary that being from economics, these are tools that only students of economics and commerce must know. These are tools that everyone must know. Single variable, for example, central tendency, arithmetic mean I talked to you about, mode I talked to you about, and then dispersion. The central value is the most representative value, and dispersion is the spread of the rest of the values around that central value. So these are some standard deviation you would have heard of, mean deviation you would have heard of. These are single variable tools which we must be well versed in. And now everything is possible on a computer. You just feed the data and it gives you the result. Which is why interpretation becomes important, and I'll talk to you about interpretation in a bit. But then before that, two or more variable possibilities exist with correlation, they exist with regression, and then there are tests of significance. The word significance for people from the languages has its own meaning. But when we are when we're doing quantitative work or qualitative work, and we are, running tests of significance, then that's a very, very typical thing that we're doing. So the word, when you're as a researcher, the word significance has to be used very, very carefully. Is the result significant? If you say, oh, this is a significant finding, then somebody might turn around and ask you, what was the level of significance? And if I have just, loosely used the word significance and I have no clue what level of significance the question is about, then I'll be stumped and I'll be in real trouble. So that's something that we have to be cognizant of as well. Then there is this qualitative tool that I wanted to introduce all of you to. I'm sure most of you know it already. It's the chi-square test. This is the simplest test that allows the handling of qualitative information. If you have answer in yes and no, if you have answer in or just any qualitative attributes, chi-square can help you handle it. Then chi-square becomes the basis of conducting some other tests also. For example, very often we're interested in knowing what is the majority view. Do people agree? Do they disagree? Because we're wanting to find out, do people think alike or do they think differently? Because there's some developmental intervention or some intervention of some kind that is being proposed or that is being thought of, but we're wanting to know whether it will be well received or not. So then we need to know, will everyone accept it? So those everyone could be men and women, dichotomous, either male or female. It could be young and old. It could be rural and urban. It could be any description which is dichotomous. Now, whenever you can, describe your population in a dichotomous form, or you can get your data in a dichotomized form, then you can use what we call, what do we call them? We call them, just a second. We call them measures of concordance. Concordance simply means similarity of view, similarity of viewpoint. So if the concordance is high, that means everybody thinks alike. So one solution will work for all. But if concordance is low, then you know that different people or different groups think differently, and therefore different solutions or different inputs will have to be provided. So it becomes the basis, and this chi-square test is at the root of most of your concordance tests. You know, Kendall's concordance is used most often. Kendall's concordance, and chi-square is the basis for that. So if you're able to generate, say, something like 25 to the minimum 25 to 30 dichotomized items, where the answer is yes or no, true or false, black or white, boy or girl, dichotomous. There's no third possibility. That's the meaning of dichotomous. Then you're able to apply these measures of concordance. And it is a tool that people who are from, not from the social sciences, people who are from literature, or from anywhere at all, who are interested in using some sort of tools, can always use it. You know, in literature, you can find out whether, whether men and women feel that the representation of the genders is appropriate in literature today. Let's say, for example, if this is a study you're doing, so whatever description in words you might do, but if you can back it with a concordance value, a tremendous amount of value can be had from the work that is being done. Yeah. So that is one thing that happens. And then just staying with this a little bit longer, chi-square, a little bit here. Another thing that you can also do is you can be looking at, index of dissimilarity. Where did it go here? This could be between men and women. Now there's a third gender to consider. It could be between, women and the third gender, and stuff like that. You could look at where M and F represent the percentages of males and females working in a particular job category. And then you have, levels of significance and so forth. If you want, I can dwell a little bit more on that. But since I'm very close to the end, I need to first finish, giving you my input. Representation in a minute, significant and significance I've talked about. Degrees of freedom is another thing that we, very often, I'm asked very often, how do I explain it? Now, for example, if I was to ask you to give me any two numbers, so any participant, please give me two numbers. Someone, Minakshi, Pratik, Mahalingam, Amalesh, anyone, somebody give me Hima Chandana.
7.
Another number, two. Two numbers, please.
9.
Alisha, I couldn't hear you.
55 and 25.
55 and 35.
Yes, ma'am.
35 and 25, she said.
Okay, one moment. 50, since she spoke first, 55 and 35. That gives me a total of how much? 55 and 35. 90, is it?
90.
Yes, ma'am.
90. Okay, so two numbers, 55 and 35, and the total is 90. Now I'm going to change my requirement, and I want you to give me two numbers such that that total is 90. Anyone?
45, 45.
45 and 45.
Yeah.
Yes,
ma'am.
Amalesh?
Yes, ma'am. 45 and 45.
45 and 45. Now, because the audio seems to be creating a little bit of a disturbance, I won't go into asking you individually, but I just want to point out the difference in these two examples. In the first instance, when I asked for two numbers, there was no condition imposed. So the person, Alisha, when she chose 55, she was absolutely free to choose a second number, and she decided that it would be 35. Both were individual, independent choices. In the second instance, when Amalesh said 45, the second number automatically became 45. Why was that? Because I had imposed the condition of summation. I required the total to be 90. So the minute one number was 45, the second had to be 45. There was no option there. Now, the difference between the two is the freedom that you lost. In the first instance, Alisha was free to choose two spaces, 55 and 35. Amalesh chose 45. The second 45 got automatically selected. So he lost 1 degree of freedom. You understand? So whenever the condition of summation is imposed, you lose a degree of freedom. So when you have, let's say you're doing some work with correlation analysis, you have a correlation between series X and between series Y. You will lose 1 degree of freedom in X and you will lose 1 degree of freedom in Y. So if N is 10, if the total number of observations are 10, degrees of freedom will be N minus 2. That's the concept of degrees of freedom. Of course, this is not a class in statistics, so I won't go into too much detail, but just to give you an idea that whenever the condition of summation is imposed, you lose a degree of freedom. All right, that is one. And another element is hypotheses. Now, when you're doing statistical work, quantitative work, in qualitative descriptions, you can hypothesize whatever you want. But again, you'll have to justify your hypotheses. It won't be just something that drops out of thin air. It'll not just materialize out of thin air, you'll have to create it. But when you're doing quantitative work and you're creating a hypothesis, we call it the null hypothesis. We write that as H0. We create H0 and the alternate H1 gets automatically created. It is the exact opposite of H0. It's called the alternate. This one is called the null hypothesis. This one is called the alternate hypothesis. Now, what you have to remember, and where most people get it wrong, is that you have to keep it in mind at all times that the null hypothesis is always created for rejection. It is never created to be accepted. Therefore, for example, if you do correlation, what is your null hypothesis? That the two values X and Y, or the two variables X and Y, are independent of each other. They are not correlated to each other. So this is a hypothesis created for rejection. Now, when you do your calculations and you arrive, it may be possible that the null hypothesis actually gets rejected. It is also possible that it does not get accepted, does not get rejected. Now, when you're writing your interpretation, you don't write H0 stands accepted. That is not what is written. By way of interpretation, you write that with the evidence of this data, it is not possible to reject H0, because you're creating H0 for rejection. I hope that is, for those of you who do deal with statistics, I hope that is something that you will, I'm sure you already know it, but I just thought I would revise this with you. And then comes this whole business of interpretation. You know, I cannot emphasize to you how important interpretation is. And this is where, as researchers, we bungle big time, because we carry a lot of baggage with us, which sort of colors our imagination, which colors our interpretation, and then we run into a lot of difficulty. Now, for example, if I was, you all have pieces of paper, pen and paper, if I was to ask you to write the name of a farmer, like that, first response, I am absolutely 100% certain that the majority of you will write a male person's name. Because when we were growing up, the picture of a farmer that we saw was this fellow with a big turban and a plow on his shoulder, and he was wearing a dhoti. And if I was to say the farmer and her husband, you would probably say, what did she just say? Because we are status quoists. We don't like too much change. And that's the kind of baggage we carry with which we interpret reality around us. And that is why I go back to my point of saying, be open-minded and very liberal and accepting of other possibilities also. If we had not been liberal, if we had not been accepting of other possibilities, probably the third gender would still not have found would not have found space. And with that, I will say, this is my last slide. I would say happy researching to all of you. And now I will also invite your interventions and your questions and whatever you might have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. You have plenty of information about qualitative
Thank
and
you, ma'am.
quantitative research, which are very useful standard research. Now I request the participants to raise up your questions. Ma'am is ready to answer for your doubts.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Amalesh. Amlesh.
First, I wanted to say the session was very thought-provoking. And here is my
Thank you.
question to you. Ma'am, how
Yeah,
do we
yeah.
go beyond significance level?
I don't understand your question. Beyond significance level means what? See, what we mean by level of significance, and it's the other side of that is the level of confidence. What is your subject, Amalesh, if I may ask you?
My subject is, my major is economics, but I'm teaching now psychology, education psychology.
All right, so you are pretty much in my neck of the woods, where we are all part of the social sciences family. Now, when we say level of significance and the level of confidence, level of significance and level of confidence are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
If I can just quickly attempt to answer your question, that level of significance, if you have a 5% level of significance, your confidence level is 95%. And if you have a 1% level of significance, your confidence level is 99%. Now, the total must be 100. That is a statistical requirement, because ideally, I would want a very high level of confidence and a very high level of significance also. So like I would want 5% significance and 99% confidence, but the total becomes 104. So that's not workable. That doesn't work for me. So what we have to do is then we have to consider that, do I want a 95% level of confidence, or will 99% confidence, is that absolutely mandatory? So what we have to then understand is, what is the meaning of level of confidence? If I can state it very, very simply, see, when we do sampling from a population or from what we call a universe, we draw a sample. And that sample will be of a certain size. Let's say your sample is of size n is equal to 10, or let's say n is equal to 20. Now, from the population from which you drew this sample and you did your tests, your correlation and whatever else, whatever other statistical tests you did, they are true and they are good for that sample of 20. If you have made no mistake in your calculation, you have applied the formula correctly, your answer is absolutely right. It is absolutely right for that sample of 20. But why do we do sampling? We do sampling because we want to be able to make a general comment on the entire population. Now, to be able to do that, then you test your result. And that's where you run your tests of significance and deal with your levels of confidence. So if I say I have a 95% level of confidence, what I basically mean is that if from that population from where I got this sample of 20, if from that population I was to draw 100 samples of size 20, then in those 100 samples, 95 times I will find the same result as I have got from my sample. If my level of confidence is 99%, then I will say that if I was to draw 100 samples of size 20 from the same population, then in 99 of those samples, I will find the same result as I have found in my sample. So the question then becomes, as a researcher, what is necessary? Is it necessary to have 99% confidence or 95% confidence? That will always be determined by the purpose that you are investigating. Let's say you are wanting to, the fellow in your canteen wants to know something about what product will sell. Should he be investing in coffee or tea or cold drinks or whatever? And you do a test, you find out people's tastes and preferences. There, if you have a 95% level of confidence, which means if somebody drew the same sample size, 100 samples, out of those 95 times, they will find what you have found. The rest of the 5 times, you're not sure what the outcome will be. Perfectly all right, not a problem. Heavens won't fall if 5 times you get it wrong out of 100. But let's say this is a research that is being carried out on some life-saving drug, on some life-saving medicine. There, you have to be 99% sure, because if you're not so sure, not so confident, then it is possible that instead of giving life to somebody, you might be creating problems there. So the purpose that is under investigation determines whether you need a higher level of confidence or a relatively lower level of confidence. That is, there is no rule that will say that this is how it has to be. That the researcher has to define and defend. I hope that answers your question, Amlesh. I have somebody raising their hand. Buhari Haruna. I hope I got that name right.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm calling from Nigeria. I'm Buhari Haruna.
Yeah, hi, good to hear. Good. Can you turn on your video so that I can see who you are?
Yes, my question is, please, is there any advantage of building a statement of the problem on a existing research gap?
Could you please repeat that because I could not hear what you said?
Sir, you're not
Okay.
audible.
I said, my question is there any advantage of building a statement of problem on existing research gap?
You're wanting to know whether it is necessary to make a statement of the research problem.
Yes.
Of course there is, because as a researcher, what I have in my mind is in my mind. How do I convey it? How do I convey it to others so that they are sort of aware of what it is that I want to deal with, or what is it that I'm talking about? So of course there is value in expressing the statement of your problem. Of course there is, because you see that what that also does is it'll probably bring on board, if you're looking for funding for your project, let's say, it'll help you find financial support also, because an agency that has a similar objective will definitely be interested in the work that you're doing. So I think there is tremendous value in making a statement of your of the problem that you're wanting to undertake. You have to make it public. It sort of keeps, and as a researcher, it will keep you on track also, because when you begin research, you start small, but as you go on, as the days roll into months and the months roll into years, the problem seems to keep becoming bigger and bigger, and new things keep getting added. But if you have specified your statement and you have specified your objectives, then you're likely to stay on track and take up other other issues that emerge can be taken up later, as subsequent projects or as subsequent research proposals. I hope that answers your question. I mean, that's what I could understand from your question. Or if it wasn't, then you can always put your question in the chat box.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Dear participants, any other questions?
Ma'am, one
Thank
more
you so
question, ma'am,
much,
if you
ma'am,
allow me.
for your valuable sharing of information. Now it's time
Ma'am,
to
one more
move on
question.
to the next session. It's my pleasure
So
to
with that,
welcome.
I just want to say, before Dr. Mahalakshmi, I just want to say a big thank you to the organizers for allowing me this opportunity to interact with all of you. I wish you all the very best, and hopefully we'll maybe meet in person sometime, and you can always get in touch with me at my university. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
ma'am.
Bye. It
Thank
was
you.
a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.